Okay, really quick, I'm making a birthday cake for Klaus, and we're packing to go down to the state fair. So, my dad doesn't know I film YouTube videos. I know he wouldn't like it. So, we're going to go into the kitchen, and I'll do voiceovers. So, he can just see me recording, making a cake, and then we'll talk about it later. Um, but, we're leaving tomorrow. The cake has to be frosted, decorated, and everything's packed. Birds will be ready. As always, we have so much to do in so little time, so let's get moving. Now, I was so used to baking the Black Forest cake that I didn't exactly follow the directions in the book, but the cake still turned out well. That was me beating the eggs, because in the Black Forest cake we beat the eggs first until they are good and foamy. Um, I believe this recipe said something a little bit different. I have a picture of the recipe that I'm going to insert at the end of the video. That means you at least have to scroll to the end to get to the picture so you know what we made. So this is, yeah, we're just doing a lot of mixing. I actually forgot what it is that we did because this was the end of August and it's now almost halfway through September, so about 3 weeks ago. So I had to move this to the island because it's just a lot easier. We've got, I think that was flour going in, but I wanted the cake to kind of be a surprise. I know Klaus's favorite cake is chocolate. So here we're just going to add a few more ingredients and mix things up. Now, I did want this to be a surprise, and it is important that you follow the recipe. Some cakes are made with cocoa powder, others are made with melted chocolate that you add to the batter a little later on. I can't remember which one this is. So for those of you who want some tips on high altitude baking, and the things that I follow here I believe are good between 3 and 7, although maybe 4 and 7. I've never really baked at a lower altitude, so I've baked at higher altitudes, oddly enough. You want to decrease the amount of sugar, usually about a tablespoon or 2 per cup. White sugar takes away the moisture, and so if your stuff is really dry, take out some sugar. You can also add fat, butter, and you can add liquids. Usually I'll add a tablespoon of liquid per cup of flour. And if that isn't enough, then you want to start adding some fat. A little extra butter never hurt anything, but it does help make things nice and moist. Now, as far as leavening goes, you want to decrease the leavening. Usually, if it's 1 teaspoon of baking soda or powder or some kind of leavening, I usually only put in a half or maybe just a little more than a half. I don't really measure. I just shake it out of the spoon and it looks about half, so I throw it in. The atmosphere at this altitude, there's not as much of it as there is at sea level. So when the cake is in the oven baking, it rises really quickly because there's nothing holding it back. But before it has a chance to set, it falls, and that makes for a dense, thick cake. So by taking out some of the leavening, it rises much more slowly, and then it'll set. The higher up you go, if you're above 7,000 feet, you're going to have to play with this recipe even more and cut back even more on your leavening in order to ensure that it rises the way that you want it to. Breads might take longer if you don't play around with leavening. Again, I don't put as much yeast in my bread. You would think rising quicker is a good thing, and I guess in bread it could be, but when we get into bread, and I will show you how to do that in a different video, you'll see what I mean. So flour, we do increase the flour by a couple of tablespoons, and I think that's me putting in flour right there. So those are some tips that you can use. You can also check on a website or something about high altitude cooking, and they can give you conversion charts for what altitude and what you can try. And then what I have done in the past is look at, okay, this, I'm going to write down what I do, usually on a post-it note, and I stick it in the recipe book. And I take it out and I say, oh, this is how it turned out. So then I can make other adjustments. This worked, but I need to adjust it further. Maybe I need to add more leavening or more fat. But as long as you keep a post-it note next to your recipe, then you'll know exactly what you did. And that's how you can experiment and keep little notes next to everything. There's a couple of recipes that I've lost in the move when we moved here. The post-it notes fell, and who knows where they are now. So some of my cookie recipes are lost and gone forever, but the cakes, fortunately, are pretty easy, and that stuck in my head. So, that's about all the tips I have for high altitude baking. So we're going to wait and see how this turns out. One other little tip, I used to make a chocolate orange cake. I still do. It's good if you have fresh oranges. You put in orange juice. I try to split up the liquids, half water, half orange juice, and then throw in some orange zest. It makes an amazing orange chocolate cake. Although usually I make a torte, which is made a little bit differently. When I get around to making a torte, I'll have to show you the difference. But this is just about all mixed up here. And we'll see, I have something special for the pan. So, this mixture is now done. That's kind of what it looks like. Sadly, I don't get to lick the beater bars. I think somebody comes downstairs or inside just about the time that I'm done with this. It always seems like there's somebody that knows. Klaus isn't here. He's at school. So I can't blame Klaus. But never fear, because Klaus isn't here. My special someone shares, and so he gets to lick part, and I get to lick part, unlike Klaus, who likes everything to himself. Okay, so first step, of course, is to take the bowl off the mixer stand, get it out of the way. Alright, so if you saved your butter wrappers, hurrah! I forgot to tell you to do that earlier. So save those butter wrappers, because guess what? They're full of butter. I used to try to take a spatula and scrape them off as much as I possibly could to get all that buttery goodness off of the wrapper. But our friend Chef Neuhold, who runs Styra Baking and Catering here in Colorado, he's not a sponsor, he's just a good friend, so I'll give him a plug. He showed us this when we were learning how to make Black Forest cake. So it's filled with buttery goodness, and you've got to butter the inside of the pan anyway, so you might as well just use the butter that's on the inside of the wrapper, and that works. So it's all nice and greased, and now you just need to flour it. Now a tip that I had was you can use cocoa powder instead of flour, because the flour sometimes turns the bottom of the cake white or has stuff on it. But I just use flour. I did try cocoa powder once. I don't remember what happened. I just didn't like the outcome. But maybe it'll be better if at that time I think I was also working with high altitude baking, so it didn't, something just didn't turn out right. So I just go back to flour cake, and I'm not turning it out of the pan. You don't see the bottom of it usually when you cut it up into squares, and mostly kids don't care anyway. The flour usually gets absorbed. So there we go. You don't hear it. There's a little bang. So one thing I do after I put all the flour in there is I turn it upside down over the sink and I give it a little tap. And that makes sure that all the loose flour is gone, and that helps prevent some of the flour getting stuck to the bottom of the cake. So we make sure that it's all good. Get every last drop into there that you can. go. And now you just get to spread it around and kind of make it nice and even in the pan. As best you can anyway. Now one thing I don't show here is even though I have a convection oven, for some reason, oh, I'm getting air bubbles out. You tap the cake a few times, it gets a lot of the air bubbles out. But even though I have a convection oven, sometimes it doesn't turn out quite right. So I start baking it, and before it's really set, I flip it 180 degrees so that it's a lot more likely to come out level. And yes, my oven is level. So, within the blink of an eye on TV time, we're going to check the oven, and you notice I open it just a little bit there. That lets out that first blast of heat, and then it's not as likely to burn you. Alright, the cake is done. And I did not wrap it. Most of the time I do try to wrap it with like a damp cloth to prevent it from the edges from cooking quicker than the center, because that's what happens when you have a domed cake, is that the edges cook quicker than the center. This one didn't turn out too badly though, as you can see there. And I think it's ready to cool and then decorate. So while we're waiting for the cake to cool, I have measured out the flour, sugar, cocoa powder, everything that Klaus needs to bake the cake. We're taking, of course, all the stuff that we need that's dry goods. Anything that's refrigerated, with the exception of the eggs, we'll buy when we get down there. Normally I would make Klaus do all of the measuring and packing himself, but seeing as he's in school and we are leaving today and there's no time between when he gets home and when we leave, I'm packing it all up for him in a nice, neat little pouch. So everything that we need to make the cake, with the exception of the pan, is going into this box, and everything else we will get when we go down there. So we're just about ready. I'm getting the gelatin, because that's something else. Now, Klaus has asked me not to share the recipe for his cake, even though if you attend the state fair and you are a contestant, you get the recipe. But for Klaus's wishes, I will not share the recipe, but you'll kind of get a sneak peek to how he does it later. Okay, so this is the little stick that I had earlier. The other two I don't think made it. One didn't. That one still has a little bit of green, but let's look here. There are a lot of roots. Now, I put it in this cup because it didn't seem to be growing roots. In the clear glass jar, it grew leaves. I put it in the cup, and I've kind of moved it out of the sun a little bit, so it's growing roots. Time to plant this thing, because we're going to be leaving, and no one's going to water it. It'll die by the time I get home, so let's get outside and get planting. Okay, we're going to start with... this. It's an all-natural, it says raised bed potting mix, but it's all natural. These trees are not supposed to have any synthetics, so things like Miracle Grow, it says specifically don't use it for these trees, at least not when they get started. So I have a nice little ceramic pot here that I'm recycling. I don't know what was in it, but it was dead, dry dirt. There was no plant, so I'm just going to snip a corner of this. Okay. Don't need very much. Ideally, we would have a mesh screen that goes over the hole to allow draining, but the dirt doesn't escape. And I had rocks somewhere I was going to use for the same kind of purpose. See if I can get a rock or two here. I have some rocks. Yeah, that'll work. I'm just going to put a couple in the bottom here. It doesn't really cover up the hole. I can't show you, they'll fall out, but covers up the hole so the dirt doesn't fall out, but the water will drain. And that's basically what we need. So, I'm going to go ahead and fill this up with some soil. I left it over there. I was going to do this on the table, but I didn't feel like carrying this back and forth, so let me go get the plant. Okay, I took the plant out of the water. There's Tiger. So again, we have a lot of root growth, which is really good. I forgot to put water in it last night. One of the reasons why I'm so anxious to get it in a pot, because if I forget and it runs out of water, that's no good. But also, since we're going to be gone, again, no one's going to water it. My dad might forget. So I'm going to measure that here. Put that in there like that. I've always wanted to get started in bonsai, but I've always been kind of afraid to. I have a problem with digging stuff up and cutting roots. I'm not that good of a gardener to begin with, but then when you're talking about cutting roots and pruning. But hopefully I have a little bit more luck with this. It seems pretty hardy. Alright, that is it for this. We're going to go inside. They like outside, but as we're going and we're subject to some really bad winds this time of year, we're just going to leave it inside until we get back. Okay, so we're going to be making standard buttercream frosting. It's just vanilla buttercream. You can use other flavors if you take my advice and use orange peel in your chocolate cake. You can omit the milk and use orange juice, although it does give the buttercream an orangey tint. Of course, that might be good. I don't know. Likewise, you can use coffee. You can, maybe not with an orange cake. I don't know that that would go very well together. Or you can use other flavoring. You can be creative and see how it works. Now, the recipe is for a double batch because one batch of buttercream never seems to do anything unless you're doing like a very thin crumb coat on a standard cake like the one we just made or the one we're decorating. But if you want leftovers for decorating and doing something fun, then, or to level out an unlevel cake, then you're going to need a double batch. And if there's any leftover, of course, you can always add an extra glob of frosting to that cake. Or it might give you an excuse to make a cookie and have frosting on those cookies. Okay, we've gotten our 6 cups of powdered sugar in. Now, because I'm going to be decorating with this frosting as well, I don't add all the milk that's called for. I add just enough milk to make it really stiff, really thick and heavy. A very dear friend of mine, who's like a sister to me, taught me this. It seemed obvious as soon as she said it, but obviously it wasn't obvious to me. Anyway, you make a really thick frosting, and then you will eventually add the coloring. Coloring adds liquid. Liquid makes things more runny. So you can always put more milk in. It's hard to take the milk out. You have to add more powdered sugar, and then you just have to add more milk and then more sugar, and it's back and forth. So I make it really thick to begin with. I put in the food coloring, and if that's not enough liquid, then I'll add a little extra milk to make sure that it can get through the piping bag and ultimately through the decorating tips. Okay, so you can see it's pretty stiff at this point, and this is about where I'll actually add a little bit more milk to this, I believe, but this is just about the point where I'm going to remove some of this frosting from the bowl. I'll probably add just another maybe half a tablespoon of milk at this point, and then once that's been whipped up, I'll remove some of the frosting to another bowl so that I can add the coloring as we go. Alright, the frosting is done. I took out what I needed, and now I'm left with really nice, smooth, creamy, thick, delicious buttercream. You do want it to be thin enough or soft enough that it will spread easily, but not so soft that it kind of melts. That's one reason if you add too much, like with food coloring, when you get it through your decorating tips, your stars and your roses won't hold shape, they'll melt. I used to just use canned frosting as a kid because I didn't know how to make frosting. And of course my roses always melted and they always look so bad. Now this is a tip, when you're just frosting a cake with buttercream and you're not going to put anything else on it, put a lot of frosting on it. That will prevent crumbs from popping up. Don't put a little on and spread it and then get more and put it on and spread it. You're going to end up with a lot of crumbs in your frosting. And that's something that I've learned over the years is you want a very thick layer, or at least what looks like a rather large amount of frosting on your cake to begin with, so that you can easily spread it around and you're not going to pick up the crumbs from below. You can also use this is a cake knife or cake spatula, but you can use one of these to level out your cake. If this cake was really uneven, I might try to throw a lot of extra buttercream on there so that I could make it a little bit more level. So admittedly, you'd get like, I don't know, I'm exaggerating here, a ½ inch of frosting on one side and a 1/16 of an inch of frosting on the other side, but it would look level. So right now it's fairly level as it is as far as a cake goes in a pan. So I'm just trying to get a nice smooth, clean work surface so that I can put the decorations on there. And I know it's for Klaus. He's not really going to care too much. Now, you have to always figure out what you want on your cake and how you're going to get it on there. I am not an artist by any stretch of the imagination. I wanted to put a car on his cake because he's 15. He can get a learner's permit and learn to drive. I cut out the car, and as you can see, I'm tracing the car onto the surface of the cake with a toothpick. Now, I did let the top of the cake air dry for about 10 minutes so that the frosting developed a nice little crust to it that prevents the car from sticking to the cake, and it allows me to more easily trace it in with the toothpick. This might be cheating to a lot of you, but for somebody who is artistically challenged, okay, I can draw a stick figure and that's really about it. This is the only way I can figure out how to make something that will resemble a car. Now, admittedly, I'm on a time deadline here, sadly. Obviously, we're leaving tonight. I have to have this wrapped up before Klaus gets home, and I've only got maybe about an hour before he shows up. So I've got to make absolute certain that I get this done. So I don't really have a lot of time to fiddle and fuss with it, sadly, because I would if I had more time. So this is just a standard star tip. I don't know what number I used, but it's a star tip, and I figured this would make a good body of the car. Now, in the past, I probably would have just used a flat tip and put rows on the car and then tried to flatten them out a little later. I've done that. It turns out okay, but I kind of like the look of the stars. It's hard to read the words that I put on there a little later, but this works. And there's the body of the car. Again, because of my time restraint, it's not perfect, but it will work. Now I'm going to mix up just a little bit of yellow. I only need a little tiny bit of yellow because it's only going on one part of the cake. So That's actually a lot more yellow than I'm going to need, but I had to do something. Now, if you're going to try your hand at decorating, a quick little tip here is to fold the edge of your piping bag down just a little bit, like this. Not quite in frame. Move over, move over. Okay. You can see that there's a little cuff there on the piping bag, and that will just help the frosting go down into the cone a little bit better, and so it's less likely to come out the top and squirt out your hand. And I thought I would draw a nice pretty yellow caution ribbon across the top of the cake, but when I started to do it, I actually got so low that I could not write the words happy birthday. The nice thing about frosting is it's a movable palette, so with the back of a spoon I'm able to remove most of the yellow frosting, and you can't tell that I screwed up on the actual cake. There, close enough. Okay, let's try this again and go across the top this time. Make sure you leave room to write the words happy birthday. Not that he doesn't know it's a birthday cake. So this is just kind of a straight tube. I think it's a rose tip. It makes a nice looking kind of ribbon. I call it a ribbon, but it's supposed to be caution tape. And now for the wheels. Now, I don't have black. I don't have a way to make black, so I use chocolate. And the way that I use chocolate is I take cocoa powder and I add it into the frosting. And then you almost always have to add a little bit of milk to go with it. But with the cocoa powder, it's close enough to chocolate or a black food coloring that most people don't care. And you know what? They like the taste of chocolate a lot better than they do the black food coloring. I honestly believe that it does taste a little different. Of course, the only black food coloring I've ever had came out of a tube. So that's all I know. And now it's time to do the lettering. So this is the straight tube. And I've used, well, because I have a lot of bits, I've just used different sizes so that I'm not having to wash or worry about the colors blending. Hurry up, come on, we don't have all day. We've got to get ready to go to the fair. Klaus is going to be home any time. Come on, can't you go any faster? That's a little bit better. Mind that penmanship. You have to be able to read it over the blue stars. All right. Whew. So, it says student driver. Yes, it's kind of hard to read, but you can read it when you actually look at it. The yellow sign says caution. It's got the slashes on there. You'll get a better picture of it here. So, right now, we have got one more thing to do, and that is to put on the border. Come on, speed up a little bit more. Okay, so that was quite a bit of work. I wanted to put hubcaps on it, but Klaus is almost back, and this is supposed to be a surprise. And see, you can read student driver. I've got to work on smoothing out those stars. Klaus won't be able to see this until Sunday, so let's keep it to ourselves. Of course, the video is way past Sunday. I did give you the recipe. I altered it to do what I did. The recipe says dump everything in a bowl and mix. I don't like doing that. And your basic standard buttercream recipe, which you can play around with alterations, as we talked about in the video. And then if you look really quick, it's gone now. The moon was setting over the mountains, and I had to share this because it was really pretty. Don't mind the brown cloud. That is actually smoke and not Denver smog, believe it or not. So enjoy your cake, and let's party together by you making your own cake.